It is official. Daniel Ricciardo has been replaced by Liam Lawson for the remainder of the 2024 F1 season. But what does this mean for Ricciardo, for Lawson, but also for Red Bull? From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks in what is, I suppose, a Ricciardo Lawson F1 update special. Ian, we record this video a day after the announcement was made, the announcement which arguably should have been made this time last week before Singapore. It's now known Ricciardo is out for the remainder of the season as parted the ways with Red Bull, and ultimately it all just feels a bit sad, really.
Sad in many respects, Nick. Yeah. I feel very sad for Daniel because, as I've written in quite an analysis type piece that you can read on the Racing News 365 website, that really Red Bull should have done him greater service by giving him the send-off that he should have had at the Singapore Grand Prix. Instead, the decision that was made, as we've now learned in an interview that Liam Lawson has done with the New Zealand Herald, that decision was made 2 weeks previously. So that means that Liam was told after the Italian Grand Prix, prior to the Azerbaijan and Singapore doubleheader. Daniel, however, was only told in between Azerbaijan and Singapore. But why did Red Bull not announce this when Daniel was told? They had then the perfect opportunity to give Daniel the fanfare that he truly deserved, because he has been a great servant, a great ambassador for the sport more than anything. Okay, he perhaps didn't have the career that arguably his talent warranted, particularly during that period with Red Bull, when he won 7 of his 8 Grand Prix. Things were going relatively well there for him, but he decided that he wanted to do something different. Apparently, we've learned from Helmut Marko that he wasn't keen on the Honda engine program coming in, but perhaps more to the point, he was perhaps starting to feel he was beginning to be overshadowed by the rising emergence of Max Verstappen. So Daniel left, and as we know, from the moment that he left, his F1 career did not go too well for him. Only one Grand Prix win that followed almost quite fortuitously in many respects. The Italian Grand Prix, of course, that victory with McLaren. But yes, even so, despite the way his career effectively tailed off, given everything that happened with McLaren, AlphaTauri RB, of course, over the past year, he really deserved far more from Red Bull in particular. And I really do feel that they should have allowed him that Singapore Grand Prix as his sign-off Grand Prix. So everybody within F1, within the paddock, the fans in the grandstands, everybody around the world could have paid tribute to Daniel because of the respect that he has garnered over this period of time, and the affection as well in which he is held, given his personality and character. Yeah, it was very sad, Nick, to answer your question directly, the way it was all conducted in the end. But yeah, I do feel sorry for Daniel, just to reiterate, because as I say, he deserves so much more.
And your point there about how Ricciardo was so loved in the F1 paddock, and actually the proof of the pudding is almost every single driver on the grid has commented below his own post, stating obviously his farewell effectively from F1. It's not quite a retirement statement, but it's not far off in all fairness. And Lewis Hamilton, Christian Horner, both with their own actual posts just for Ricciardo. And for me, Liam Lawson, a driver who quite clearly very, very talented and deserves a spot on the grid, of course, now has the remaining 6 races at RB alongside Yuki Tsunoda to stake his claim for 2025, really. But given the way this is being handled and that Ricciardo didn't get the farewell he deserved, do you think this also makes life more difficult for Liam Lawson, given the situation he's now walking into?
I don't think so. I think he knows exactly what he's walking into. And he has this opportunity now. And the question that he's not been directly asked yet is this 6th race turn an audition for a potential seat at Red Bull next year? Yeah. We still haven't fully worked out yet or been told what is the situation with regard to Sergio Perez. We know that Sergio signed this new 1+1 deal with Red Bull in June of this year. The 1+1 being first year guaranteed, pretty much the following year, the +1, an option for 2026. Of course, ever since that was signed, Checo has faced this uncertainty around his continuing future, which had to be allayed just after the Belgian Grand Prix and ahead of the summer break, because there was so much conjecture around what was happening. His form had tailed off so disastrously that we were all speculating, could he even continue post-summer break? Well, it was announced at the Red Bull factory in Milton Keynes on the Monday after the Belgian Grand Prix, which, as you know, was the final race before F1 summer break, that Checo Perez would continue with Red Bull for the remainder of this season. But now we are again facing this situation. Yes, he has this 1+1, but what will happen at the end of this season? As I said, is this 6-race turn for Liam Lawson effectively an audition that could see him placed in the Red Bull seat alongside Max Verstappen next season? And then RB effectively continues its junior driver auditions by handing somebody like Isaac Hadjar, for argument's sake, who's currently in F2, has done reasonably well during this period of time in F2, hand him that seat for next season alongside Yuki Tsunoda, because we know full well that at this stage, Yuki's got a contract with RB for next year, but it's looking like he's never, ever going to get that promotion that he's long craved to Red Bull. And we think that Liam Lawson is being eyed as this potential driver long-term for Red Bull going forward. It's still a fascinating picture because, as I say, we do not know beyond the end of this season what Liam Lawson's situation is. He might have a little bit of an idea because, as I mentioned, he knew 2 weeks previously what was going to happen in terms of him getting this seat. So you can only assume, certainly, you know, regardless of what happens over these 6 races, you would assume that he's absolutely got a seat for RB for next year. It's just a question of, has he got a seat at Red Bull for next year?
So it ultimately shows that Checo is not yet quite out of the woods, despite obviously Ricciardo getting the axe. And the thing that's really fascinating, you touched upon it a little bit there, with Ricciardo being gone and Lawson taking that seat, it offers an opportunity for drivers like potentially Isaac Hadjar, for Arvid Lindblad, Lindblad in particular being very, very highly rated by Red Bull, and Christian Horner. This now kind of reintroduces the whole RB being a youth team, a team for the Red Bull junior drivers, because with Ricciardo being there, it kind of lost that, given he's obviously 35 years old. And actually, I would imagine now it's almost back to the old ways with the sister team, and that it is going to be driving that young talent regardless now of whether it's Lawson in that seat next year or not, because realistically, Checo's not going to be demoted to RB. It's either going to be a Red Bull seat or no seat.
I think those 5 races that Daniel missed last year really threw Red Bull a curveball, because if you remember right, they brought Daniel back after a Pirelli tyre test at Silverstone after the British Grand Prix, and he performed so superbly that an effective qualifying lap that he did was quick enough that it would have been second on the grid at the British Grand Prix weekend just a few days previously. He was that good. And so they thought, Nick de Vries has not done well for us. It's time to get rid of Nick. We'll bring Daniel in for the rest of the season. Of course, Daniel came in. He had the Hungarian and the Belgian Grand Prix that immediately followed. Then we had the summer break. Then, of course, he came back and he had that practice crash at the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, broke multiple fractures of the little finger and the bone in his left hand. And that, of course, kept him out for 5 Grand Prix. And as I say, it kind of put Red Bull and the Red Bull family in a little bit of an awkward situation because, yes, Daniel then came back for the few Grand Prix towards the end, and he performed reasonably well. I remember he qualified 4th in Mexico, was 7th in the Grand Prix, showed a true glimpse over that weekend as to the talent that he felt he still had, and we all, many of us observers, felt that he still had as well. And so they kind of got to get the impression that they kind of thought, okay, well, we'll give Daniel this further opportunity for next season, even though we really should be promoting our junior drivers. Because I think the thinking was that if Daniel can perform well again, then more than likely we will get him in the seat for Red Bull alongside Max Verstappen for 2025. Of course, we now know that is not how it has played out. Daniel only sporadically showed touches of the form and the performance that we know or that we saw in the past. He himself had conceded in the pen on the Sunday post-Singapore Grand Prix that maybe age had finally caught up with him. Yes, he felt he still had the talent within him, that he still could rise to the occasion, but he also recognized the fact that maybe it was only here or there, and that, as I say, maybe age had caught up with him, and it was time to bring in the youngsters. There was at least this acknowledgement from Daniel, and that he had, as he said in his own words, was now at peace with the decision that had been made, and it was effectively his time to move on, even though many of us feel he should have, A, at least been afforded the send-off at Singapore, or B, have continued for the rest of this season. But given the seemingly contractual obligations that surrounded Liam Lawson, this is why the Red Bull family have had to bring him in now, give him these 6 races effectively now, as we discussed earlier, to prove himself for next season.
For certain. I just want to end, obviously, on your closing thoughts on a sentence in Lewis Hamilton's tribute to Ricciardo, and it was, "You leave a legacy of always being yourself, which in this sport is never easy." And that's spot on, because Ricciardo's personality is so unique. He was, in the worst of times, still the biggest smile in the paddock, and it's very rare to come across, let alone a racing driver like that, but a person like that in general.
Yeah, such brilliant words from Lewis. Superbly put, because Daniel, what you saw is what you got with Daniel Ricciardo. There was nothing hidden. He spoke from his heart whenever you interviewed him. There was passion, there was fun, there was humour. And the only time I ever saw him not himself was over the course of that Singapore Grand Prix weekend, because, of course, he'd been told beforehand, this is it, Daniel, this is going to be your last Grand Prix now. And, of course, every time he spoke to someone, every interview that he gave, he, of course, couldn't speak as he wanted to speak. It was all couched in these terms that, well, I know what's happening, but I can't really talk about it, which, again, is all part of the great shame that surrounds this, what now goes down as his last Grand Prix. I don't see him returning. I think he's pretty set within himself that that's not going to be the case. He confirmed again post-Singapore Grand Prix that he doesn't want to take on any kind of reserve role. That's not for him. And he doesn't want to, come back to F1 in a team where, he's going to be pootling around for, 10th, 9th place, fighting in that mid-pack, maybe towards the back of the grid. That's not him. That's not who he is. That's not who he wants to be going forward. A very trusted insider told me when I spoke to this person after the Singapore Grand Prix, and I discovered that most definitely that was Daniel's last race. He said, you won't see him at a racetrack again this season. He just now wants to go away, almost like recover to a certain extent, because this has been quite a chastening experience for him ever since he left McLaren, even through those 2 McLaren years, which, as we know, was so difficult for him. He kind of came out of that, and when he was retaken on by Red Bull, and he recognised that everything that happened at McLaren was not so much about him, was more to do with the driving style that he had been forced to adapt to cope with that particular kind of McLaren car over those 2 years. And he rediscovered himself to a certain extent at Red Bull, but unfortunately, it's just not kind of worked out for him. And, he goes with everybody's best wishes. That's at least the one good thing that you can say with regard to Daniel Ricciardo, as we've touched on within this, that he was held in such high esteem, such high regard, that there's not one single person within Formula One has had a bad word to say about him and this departure.
Absolutely. Of course, we wish Daniel all the best in whatever he decides to do next, or eventually, hopefully still something behind the seat of a race car, because that's where he needs to be. For those who've been watching this video, let us know your thoughts in the comment section on whether RB and Red Bull have done the right thing or not. We would love to get your thoughts. As always, from myself and Ian, this has been a special episode of the F1 Update. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video. See you later.
As always, folks, take care till the next time.